And we're live with another episode of State Smash Podcast. This time we're live with Shane Radliff of the Vonu podcast and Liberty Under Attack. Before we get into that, some housekeeping, normal housekeeping. There are links in the description. You can use those links to download the Brave browser to browse ad-free, the crypto tab to start using spare CPU power to get cryptocurrency with Chrome-based browsers. There's also Liberty Mugs, which has sponsored my content, and if you buy one of their mugs, it's guaranteed to piss off at least somebody. So by all means, bring it to Starbucks and make the people around you very uncomfortable, because that's what we got to do. We got to make people uncomfortable. And there's also another link at the bottom to find other ways to support the show. I support many cryptocurrencies, and can probably support whatever other cryptocurrencies you want, as long as you let me know. I just set up my first Doge wallet the other day, so I mean, it's all like relatively new to me, to be honest. But either way, Shane, why don't you tell us a little bit about what made you an anarchist?
Yeah, so basically why I'm an anarchist is it's perspective. But I guess the interesting story, and I think what you kind of want to get to, is how did I get to where I am today? How did I get to, calling myself an anarchist and, adhering to this ideology? So it basically started back, and I would say early to mid 2011. And I was at home at that time. I was not interested in politics at all. I was, running around chasing women and really didn't care about anything. But I was at home, and I found a documentary on Netflix called 9/11 Loose Change. Have you seen that documentary, Jeremiah?
Yeah. It's if I remember correctly, it's the one which starts to call into question the official narrative, and it's the one where which has people like calling that sort of thing the quintessential false 9/11 conspiracy. It's sort of like the flat earth of documentary. Like that's the way people insult it, but it's a pretty good documentary if I remember correctly. You can watch it on Amazon Video.
Right. Yeah, but that was my my first introduction to anything, and after watching that, I was a little mind blown, as you can imagine, from never being introduced to these ideas, or I guess counter narratives before. So it was kind of funny. I walked into the living room. My dad has always been interested in politics, so I went in and said, "Hey, Dad, a third tower fell on 9/11?" And he just went through kind of some of the details I'd heard in the documentary, and he just kind of, I don't know, and kind of he just kind of shoved it aside. And I was kind of, and I did too. I kind of put aside that pursuit indefinitely, until a few months later, when I walked back into the living room. I still lived with my parents at that time. I was 18 or 19. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, Shane, yeah, I looked into that 9/11 thing, and yeah, you Trilateral Commission, no," and all, like, he just started running through a list of things, Council on Foreign Relations. And then I repicked up that pursuit, because he wanted to start a website and start talking about some of these things. So I said, "Yeah, I'll help you do it. Let's do it together." So I bought the domain libertyunderattack.com, and I think this is the first time I've ever told this story, but at least in this depth. But so I purchased the domain libertyunderattack.com, and my dad and I, wrote little articles and blog posts on there for 6 months or so, and then he kind of stopped doing it, and my interest only continued to grow. So I kind of took over the domain name, and that's where Liberty Under Attack came from. But so yeah, around the 2012 election was the first and last election cycle I was ever interested in politics. So I followed it, and it was actually pretty mild compared to the 2016 one between Dolan J. Trump and Hillary Clinton. But I was interested in that. I voted once. It was the only time I ever voted. And soon after, kind of became disgruntled with politics. It only took about 6 months of being in that realm, and I was already sick of it. Found a guy named Bill Cooper a little after that, probably 2012 or 2013. And I don't know if you're familiar with Bill Cooper, but he was a really interesting dude. He wrote a book called Behold the Pale Horse. And he had a radio show that ran from like the 1990 to 2001, when he was murdered by the Bludgies, murdered by the cops. But yeah, he was definitely more of a conspiracist. The first series I ever listened to of his was Mystery Babylon, and I went down that kind of Bill Cooper conspiratorial rabbit hole for some time. And I was interested in looking for other alternative media, like Bill's show, but in that conspiratorial realm, I really couldn't find anything. So I figured, if I want this outlet to exist, I'm going to have to create it. Like, that's just what I have to do. So in February of 2015, I launched Liberty Under Attack Radio. And it did start out as a replacement to Bill's, or an attempted replacement, covering, really deep conspiratorial, subjects and rabbit holes. But a few months later, I came across some anarchists. And we became friends and started chatting a lot. And they ridded me of my status spooks, and talked me through all my contradictions, my minimal contradictions, I would say. I was pretty close to anarchism, anyways. But they talked me through the rest of it, and I'd say around May of 2015, I came out as an anarchist, and it's kind of been history since that point. So that's kind of the short, condensed version, I suppose.
And just so that we're absolutely clear for whoever's listening, the one of the status spooks wasn't believing that there were conspiracies, right? Like like you still believe in like the Trilateral Commission controlling a lot of foreign policy, for instance.
Sure,
right?
I guess the only real major hangup for me was honestly, as I look back, I'm sure you're familiar with the fascist books here, memories thing that they do. I'll look at statuses from I posted back in 2014, and like 2014, before I even really knew of anarchism. And I sound like an anarchist sometimes, but then I sounded like a controlled schizophrenic at other times. The real major contention was basically that I didn't trust very many people, and I don't trust them, so I don't really trust them without a government either. That was kind of the major hangup, and that was a really easy one to work through, actually. But it was kind of just trying to, educate myself before I, stepped out into the public as an anarchist. So that's why it took a few months of conversation with folks. But that was really my only major contention. So, yeah.
So, and okay, so my question is, did becoming an anarchist broaden your idea of how liberty was under attack, or did it just change your focus?
That's a good question. I would say it expanded it, because obviously when I was a minarchist, there's still that kind of I was a constitutionalist, actually. That's what Bill was, and he did a lot of he talked about the Constitution a lot, and I really dug it back in the day. But I would say it expanded it, because I kind of had that mindset that anything in the Constitution is okay, which obviously that's not true. As an anarchist, I know that now, but I kind of still held on to that, that some aspects of government were good and necessary. But when I became an anarchist, it expanded, every aspect of the state, even if it's not outright immoral, could be better. Could be, the service could be better provided by the market. And from a philosophical perspective, it doesn't have to be funded by force. So I would say it definitely expanded it.
Yeah, because I mean, if somebody wants to go down a conspiracy rabbit hole, the idea that this is all human farming is far more interesting than the idea that as long as we obey a piece of paper, everything is going to be fine, I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, and this is coming from somebody who still has like fucking probably at least 90 pocket constitutions from trying to start a Young Americans for Liberty chapter. So I mean, I was where you are. Sorry, not where you are, where you were before like the Ron Paul campaign, and then the Ron Paul campaign just sort of switched me over because I saw him get the shaft. I saw what politics was, and I saw that it couldn't be anything else than a scam. And I'm assuming it was something similar because you talk about being disenfranchised by the political system. So, I mean, what was the catalyzing moment that made you realize, hey, this might be a scam?
Yeah. Well, it actually wasn't really Ron Paul. I mean, I came across some of his videos on YouTube, and I watched it. And, they were good. I liked him, but he really didn't have that much of an impact on me, I wouldn't say.
Right.
I think what really was the catalyst was hearing Bill Cooper back in the 1990s. Destroy the war narratives and destroy the left right paradigm, and to show that for me back at that time, it was that politics is rigged. If anyone's going to get into a position where they can become president, presidents are selected, not elected, right?
Right.
So it was basically just the realization that holy shit, I have no control over this whatsoever. Like this is just completely out of my control. It's a shit show. Pardon my language, but I mean, it was
use
just
whatever language you want.
okay, good deal. But that was basically it. I felt powerless over it. Powerless to I guess promote freedom through the political means. And I mean, yeah, I voted that one time in that election, and I put together a war on drugs informational protest and on my college campus. But I mean, that was I just realized that that route, political crusading, just wasn't going to get me the freedom that I wanted it to. So I continued to educate myself for, oh gosh, another 4 years. The last 3 being kind of on anarchism and direct action solutions and finding freedom now. But yeah, it was basically just the fact that I want freedom and I wanted freedom, and I always tried to choose the most efficacious path towards it, and very very quickly realized that politics was not the most efficacious route towards personal freedom. It's actually counterintuitive a lot of times. And the current political, I guess, system we have now is a result of successful and failed political reforms of the past. So it's to me, it's not only a waste of time and just a bad strategy for personal freedom. It's actually counterintuitive. So
right. I always phrase it like this to people: would you spend money on a car that was proven time and time again and tested time and time again to only work if you were a certain type of person, if you were a certain class of person that you aren't? And would you still buy this car knowing that there was a very strong likelihood it wouldn't turn on for you, and that you wouldn't be able to get anywhere with it if it did? And most people say, yeah, no, I wouldn't. And they see sort of where I'm going with that, because life and time and energy are limited, and spending it on politics, spending it on trying to go through the system, I guess would be a decent way of putting it, to try and achieve change of the system that's built so that it can further itself and not really liberty at all. Doesn't strike me as a very good use of one's limited life, because like, we're gonna die someday, and I don't think anybody wants to look back on their life and think, I messed up. I spent my time doing something that was directly not only useless, but like pushed other people in the same useless direction. So I would say politics is not only a scam, but it's designed to be make work. So it's some pretty bad stuff. But you do the Vonu podcast, which, if I understand correctly, is designed to talk about like personal freedom, sustainability, homesteading, that sort of thing. Why don't you describe that a little bit?
Sure. So yeah, those are definitely elements of Vonu, but we'll start with definitions first. That's the best place to start, especially with new concepts like Vonu might be to a lot of your listeners. So Vonu is an awkward contraction of the words voluntary, not vulnerable. It's premised around becoming as invulnerable to coercion as humanly possible from both public coercers, governments, and private coercers, just private violators of person and property. So even in Ancapistan, or this hypothetical free society, Vonu would still be relevant because there would still be violators of person and property. So that's kind of the foundation for it. A little history here, because that's kind of some fascinating stuff. But there's this gentleman back in the 1960s. But his real name was Tom Marshall, and he decided to go by a pseudonym later on, Rayo. He wrote for a number of publications back in the 1960s discussing these ideas, and becoming involved in a number of projects. But he wanted freedom. He desired freedom, and he was sick of the all talk no action libertarians back in his day. He grew up, or he lived in the 60s in Southern California, where there was a bustling libertarian community. So he was around a lot of libertarians and anarchists at that time. But he was just sick of the talk. He said, "Okay, we've got the philosophy down enough. Can we go live free now?" And apparently, he was kind of one of the few that wanted to go live free now. So he moved out of his apartment into a camper mounted on his pickup truck, and he pursued a lifestyle change called van nomadism. So he stayed a lot of his time in the Siskiyou National Forest, which is Northern California and Southern Oregon. And he just traveled around in his van with his free mate Roberta. And they, just lived free. But Rayo wasn't satisfied. Obviously, if you're driving a vehicle, it's wise to have, a driver's license and registration, the mandatory insurance, because if you don't have those, that makes you more vulnerable to coercion, right? If you don't have to have those things, a lot of times they'll take you straight to jail. Don't collect $100 or whatever, and all that sort of stuff. So he didn't like the strategy's reliance on slave tags, as he called them. So he decided that him and his freemate decided that they were going to go a little further with it, and they decided to pursue wilderness Vonu out in the Siskiyou National Forest. So they used the van a little bit, but generally, throughout probably 9-10 months of the year, they lived in a polyethylene A tent in the middle of a national forest. And to I guess provide a visual for your listeners here, polyethylene A tent. Just imagine you have two trees. Across from each other. You have a rope, a ridge rope connecting the two, and you throw a piece of plastic over the top, and that's what they lived in for a large portion of the time. So Ray was a pretty hardcore guy, and the last we heard from him was 1974 when he ceased all communications. So we don't know what happened of him after that. But the last we really know is that he was starting to experiment with underground dwellings. He was pursuing troglodytism. So that was Rayo, and the guy that largely developed this freedom strategy. But it's in no way. I always kind of provide this caveat, and when I give presentations on Vonu, I always like to see I always like to provide that history and then just like look for the reactions. Because if you talk about wilderness Vonu, they're like, okay, so this is one of those things. No, that's what Rayo did. There's a lot of other more practical things that we can do in pursuance of freedom. But
right, and because you say troglodytism, and most people are only going to assume that you mean the insulting term of troglodyte. So I mean, on that level, it's sort of like saying you're an anarchist. People are going to take a second look because they're gonna wonder what you're really advocating, and sometimes it's as simple as saying I'm just really advocating this other thing. So what would your version of Vonu be?
Sure. So there are a lot of options for Vonu, and some strategies, I mean, haven't been or some lifestyle changes have not been conceived of yet. We haven't thought of all of them. Some of them haven't been fleshed out completely, like Vonuing in cities. But yeah, some of the strategies, the one that I'm going to be pursuing is van nomadism, and this is super practical. Super practical as far as as a strategy for personal freedom. It's not only one of the most liberating strategies, but it's also one of the cheapest. Most of the van nomads, I looked into probably 100 case studies. If you type in van dwelling on YouTube, there's a bunch of these folks. It's awesome. But most of these folks live on $500 to $750 a month, and they live pretty well out there on the road, because the largest expense for most folks is
camping fees,
housing.
Right?
Well, is for your average person, their most expensive expense is housing. So once you move out of your stationary dwelling, you don't have to pay that mortgage. You don't have to pay that. You don't have that $250,000 house with that expensive insurance. Once you get rid of that expense, a lot of folks really don't need much to live on, which is what most van nomads find out as they get on the road. But as far as the major expenses for van nomads, I mean, it just depends upon what avenue people want to go down. Some stealth camp in cities, where they have a van that looks like a work van. It's a stealth van, and they can pretty much no one knows they're in there sleeping. No one knows they live in there, and they have good spots they park in various cities. There are also folks who put solar panels on their roof. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to spend a lot of my time off grid, not having to pay camping fees. And I guess there's kind of a blend, a blend in there too, where some folks will go to RV campgrounds, some will go, so they'll spend some time there, some time out in the middle of the wilderness or whatever. But the most expensive expense for van nomads, I would say, is, and it's kind of dependent though. For some it would be gas, but for some van nomads don't travel that much, so it wouldn't be gas. Probably car insurance, I would say, would be the most expensive. The biggest expense that most van nomads would face. But yeah, that's one thing. You got anything there so far?
Well, and in registration for the vehicle in some states, that's pretty expensive, especially depending on what vehicle you have. And of course, if you plan to take that vehicle many places. Wear and tear and gas could be a problem.
Well, yeah, repairs and breakdowns. Yeah, when those do happen, they can be expensive. Yeah.
Especially if you have to go into the city by foot, because essentially you're out in the middle of the wilderness and you can't like get your van repairs done. Like, would you recommend, if somebody does this sort of van dwelling kind of thing, that they have their own personal like repair kits in their van, or would you recommend that they just have like AAA or something?
Well, AAA is just a standard thing. I mean, it's I think it's like 120 bucks a year, something like that. It's 100 less than 200 bucks a year, and that's a recommendation from all the van nomads I've seen. But yeah, I mean, you obviously, since that's going to be your home and you've got to keep all your stuff in there, you can't take a massive toolbox with all of your tools. I would say, yeah, definitely bring some tools on board. If you know of common issues with the van that you drive, like if I don't know if some part needs replaced often. If it needs replaced often, you might bring a couple of those with you, and the tools to repair that. But I mean, there are sometimes that you might just or I'd say most of the time from the videos I've watched and from van nomads I've talked to, most of the repairs you can be really self-sufficient, but if a part a part breaks and you don't have the parts, even if you know how to fix it, that really doesn't make much of a difference, right? So yeah, I'd say AAA. And then one of the best things about breaking down in your liveaboard van versus breaking down in a car is that you've got your house with you, and if you've got solar panels, you've got a week of food, a week of water. I mean, you don't have to panic. And if AAA is going to take, I don't know how long they typically take, but if you're pretty far out there, and it might take them, a day to get there, you're going to be okay. You've got everything you need in your van already.
Especially if you're not vegan and you can hunt.
Yes, but I mean, I guess just as a little side note here, a lot of the folks in the van nomad community do come from kind of the leftist persuasion.
Well, I have no problem with that.
No, but they come from like kind of a leftist persuasion, and most of the ones I've seen are vegan, which is just kind of funny. I don't care about that at all, because these folks are out there, pursuing their own personal freedom for whatever their motivations are. So,
but so in that perspective, okay, so what would you personally recommend as the ideal sort of kit for wilderness living? I noticed that the background on your page is like a forest and mountains. So what would you say is your ideal kit? Like maybe your top 10 pieces of kit?
Yeah, well, that's for Vonu, that's a difficult question to answer, because it's fully based individually. Some people will take more out there. Some might just have a backpack and a couple things out there, and they'll be fine pursuing the wilderness Vonu lifestyle. There's also the aspect. Rayo talked about Smoomins. There was an article on Vonu Life, Smoomins with super hobos, and he talked about having various shelters hidden throughout like the Siskiyou region per se. And each of those serves different purposes. So you'd have your summer survival, you'd have your winter survival, you'd have a small workshop if you need to do any fabrication or anything like that, and you'd have these various I guess dwellings or structures that serve different purposes. So as far as kind of Rayo's, I guess, perspective on the strategy, and also what I would say to be the pursuit of wilderness Vonu that would yield the most invulnerability to coercion, I would say that it would be that kind of setup with wilderness Vonu, where you have your summer survival, your winter survival, you've got your your small workshop, you've got and the things that you need at each of those locations, and then you'd have stuff that you'd carry to all of your locations, like obviously storable foods is what Rayo mostly lived off of. They'd have gallon drums they could carry around with them if they needed to, and they had the van for transport as well if they needed it. But food, water, medicine is crucially important, especially if you're a Vonuan. Vonuans don't typically have the 9-to-5 healthcare, so they've got to be kind of creative in their pursuit of medical treatment. And keeping themselves, from getting from needing any medical attention. I mean, obviously knives and guns might not be a bad idea if you're going to be doing hunting, and also just for self-defense. You never know what you're going to come across out there in the Siskiyou. Maybe you'll come across a bear. You might. You never know.
So you
There are
wouldn't
natural.
personally recommend like bows and arrows or something?
I mean, maybe. And a lot of bows and arrows are lightweight, which so they wouldn't be hard to haul around. I guess it would just be up to the individual. For me, I don't have any experience with bows and arrows, so I wouldn't. I
Ah,
wouldn't
gotcha.
personally. I wouldn't personally bring. I wouldn't personally bring one. But if someone's a master archer and they want to and it would make them stealthier too, right? And a bow is a lot quieter than a gun. So if they hunt deer with their bow, then they would be a little ahead of me with my firearms. um since they do make loud noises and such, and draw some attention. So yeah.
Yeah, because like I've talked to many people who are into survivalism, and about a third of them advocate bows and arrows, and about like I would say um a quarter of the rest advocate just knife hunting, like and taking the stealth approach. Like I know this. I'm not going to mention his name, but I know this really cool Native American dude, and he showed me how quiet you can be wearing moccasins. And like he showed like essentially if you use this weird S pattern with your walk, moving forward, well, okay, more of a zigzag. I don't know. He didn't describe it as either, but it's this weird thing where you overstep over your legs. You can sort of like advance in the in a singular direction without leaving tracks and without making sounds. Like you can avoid snapping twigs even, and it's all about like body weight distribution. And I was really impressed by that because he said essentially that if you're very careful, you can sneak up on large game if they're like eating or something with that.
That's interesting. That's interesting. And Rayo did talk about you like if you're around where one of your Vonu shelters is, where I think there's like soft-soled shoes, like you're talking about moccasins. When you're around your Vonu home, yeah, wear moccasins, not work boots that'll leave tracks. Now, if you're far away from your your Vonu shelter, then maybe you could wear some hard-soled boots. I don't know if that's the right term, but I think you know what I mean. Then yeah, you could do that out there. So Rayo even talked about kind of utilizing those sorts of strategies, for concealment purposes. So yeah, I mean, wilderness fauna is an interesting one. It's not the most attractive to folks. Van nomadism is extremely attractive to folks, as I mentioned. I'd really recommend your listeners go to just type in van dwelling on YouTube. It's a really, really I don't know. All it takes, and I think this is pretty typical for a lot of van nomads, is they find these YouTube videos and they binge watch them for an extended period of time, like I did for 2 months straight, basically every night watching 2 or 3 hours of this stuff, really learning about the lifestyle or all the obstacles. Some of the obstacles, the major benefits and all of that. That's what drew me. Like Ray, I've known about van nomadism for like 3 years. Rayo talked about it in his book that I digitized 3 years ago that your listeners can find for free at vonipodcast.com. But I really didn't. It took seeing the lifestyle in action. And I don't know. I don't know about you, man, but I don't do well in survival society 9 to 5 jobs. I just don't
Oh
do
yeah,
well.
well,
So
that's one of the perks of having said what I've said is that you don't really get hired for those sorts of jobs even if you apply. So I do a bunch of odd jobs, and like I do graphic design and that sort of thing, and that usually keeps me somewhat above water. But like when I did have a 9 to 5 job, it was I don't know where you are in the country or if they have these where you
Decatur,
are,
Illinois.
but okay, well, do they have Jack in the Boxes there?
No.
Okay, well, it's terrible, the one I worked at, and nobody should ever choose that as a job if they have any other choice. I would say, because basically, what you are is it's really ironic. I started to feel like it. Like the clown mascot it's a little clown. It's a Jack in the Box, with a little pointy hat, and it's basically like it makes you feel like the only thing you're doing is being pushed at people's demand. Like they turn the crank and out comes food. You're not really a human. And so yeah, I would say that the more freedom minded you are, the less that sort of job seems appealing. Definitely.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I need a lifestyle that's I've got type 1 diabetes too, so I don't know how long I could live it to be like 75 or 80, but I could also have complications and die at age 50. As you said earlier, I mean, I've got one life to live, and I don't want to spend my entire life working, 40 hours a week at a job I don't like, right? So van nomadism is an option. It's a real option. You don't need as much to live on, and with the advent of the internet, um there's a lot of opportunities for freelancing and digital nomadism, which is a thing. It's a really popular thing. There are a lot of opportunities out there where you can since you don't need to live on as much, you don't need to work as much, and therefore you a lot more of your time is your time. For van nomadism for me is just I would say it's an interim lifestyle change. That's how Rayo utilized it too. It's for someone who is heavily involved in the status servile society. It's a really good way to get people out of that. I guess get them with if they need to get out of the servile society. It's a good interim lifestyle. And it's also, some people do it forever. But for me, I'm probably going to use that as an interim lifestyle because I still want to pursue minimal sailboating and live out on the ocean. That's the end goal, but I don't have the capital for that now. I don't have the experience. I've never sailed a boat, and I don't know how to navigate the high seas. So that one's a little more difficult than just doing what I've done for 10 years, traveling around in my car. So
yeah. And on that level, I guess like I was gonna bring this up after, but I guess it's a good sort of segue into it now. You've heard of Steam It, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And are you on that yet?
Yes, yeah. Steamit.com/at Shane Radliff. I joined in like mid 2016. Yeah.
Right. So on that level, there's plenty of people over there who use that as a microeconomy. And I think that the cryptocurrency economy is something that's going to be huge relatively shortly, because the dollar is an untenable mess, and it requires like a very unstable system that is doomed to fail because of the very nature of the currency. It's a debt scam. And so essentially I advocate people get in on cryptocurrency, and there's this thing called Steam gigs, and it's relatively new, but what it is it's freelance work and people can get paid in Steam. And I'm not sponsored by them or anything.
Ooh,
but
I need to look into that.
Yeah,
Steam
and I
gigs?
haven't .com, yeah. And I haven't been paid by them, and I haven't started a Steam gig yet. I'm going to, though. It's going to be a recurring gig for graphic design and whatever else people need. But essentially, what that does, what that sort of digital microeconomy does, is it frees people up to stop being essentially a servant to the system that is designed them to be a tax cattle. And while I don't think a lot of people are going to do that, while I think that sort of thing is going to be very rare, especially if the elites finally decide to act on the Georgia Guidestones, which I would love to get your opinion on that sort of thing before this podcast is over, since your start was in conspiracies, much like mine. But that doesn't mean that people can't start now, and it doesn't mean that they can't start getting involved with the cryptocurrency microeconomies, because there's pretty much one for everybody. There are cryptocurrencies for people of leftist persuasion to use that are designed to support a universal basic income, or a profit-free mutualist existence, or something like that. And there are ones for more right-leaning people or more technology-leaning people. There's a hemp coin and a pot coin that are constantly competing for traction. I guess my main point is I want to get your idea on how to still stay at least somewhat connected if you are into Vonu, or if that's even considered preferable, to stay connected to the outside world, or if it's just designed to shut you off completely from it.
Yeah. So it could do whatever. I mean, whatever the individual wants to do in their pursuit of Vonu, they can do. Rayo, as your listeners can probably clearly tell, he was more of an isolationist, I guess you could say, not in the war sense either. He was just he lived in isolation. He wasn't a big fan of he wasn't a big fan of people. So wilderness fawning with him and his free mate worked very, very well for him. But there are other strategies, like intentional communities. There are van nomad caravans, which would be a van nomad intentional community. So there's mobile and I guess fixed intentional communities where people can associate with others to pursue whatever goals they want to pursue. If that's self-sufficiency, great. If it's I don't know, a private digital economy using a cryptocurrency and mesh network nodes, great. I mean, whatever the end goal for them is, whatever the end goal for them is it's great. You can definitely work with others in pursuit of Vonu.
As long as you're trying to minimize the connection to the system that would enslave you, I guess would be a good way to put it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. The idea is to start Vonu mini cultures where, autonomy, freedom, and where autonomy and freedom are respected, and where there's peace and not, war and people getting beaten by bludgies and all of those things. So yeah, definitely. Now you asked, in regards to staying connected to the servile society or staying connected to the internet. Some will choose to disconnect completely and not really utilize any of that technology, kind of go more the primitivist route, if I can speak. But there are a lot of digital nomads out there that stay connected to the internet out off grid. The internet accessibility has increased so much. Now it may be a little more expensive than what you pay at your stationary dwelling, but there's also free Wi-Fi and such too. I mean, you're there's going to be some utilization of the state of servile society's infrastructure early on, right? Because until there's an alternative economy developed, there's going to be some reliance upon it. That's just kind of a given. So, I mean, as far as what I'm going to do, there's going to be some interaction with the servile society. Definitely, I'm going to stay connected to the internet because I'm going to continue doing podcasting and creating self-liberational media. Yeah, I guess that's as far as staying connected. Some people choose not to. I'll choose to stay connected, but I'll also choose to stay out off grid for weeks at a time, so I don't have to have interaction with people who would rather see me tossed in a cage. So yeah.
Right. Well, because the general reason I asked that is because in order for actual change to happen, people have to see a possible favorable outcome, a possible favorable lifestyle, and they have to be able to see it work. Like, sure. I mean, because that's the reason most people are sticking with the society that we have, because they have a long-standing precedent of these sorts of status societies. I hate to use this word in relation to them, but working. And so I think that a decent amount of these people, if this was to become a thing, would have to essentially keep connected enough that they could tell their success stories to people, and that would mean that like they would have to be less introverted than a lot of these people seem to be, and possibly like more social than a lot of these people seem to be. And I think that if that sort of thing started to look like something your next door neighbor could get into, and started to look like something that you could raise your children positively in, I think that would help dramatically. So, I mean, which do you think has more value? The insular sort of, I'm gonna, inch my way out of society, or do you do you think that there's any value to sort of keeping connected so that you can send letters from the positive future to get people on board?
Right, and that's self-liberational media. That's the van dwelling portion of YouTube. That's exactly what that is, showing people the lifestyle, getting them interested, showing them that it's practical and affordable, and then some people decide to pursue the lifestyle. So I think that's a really I think that's a really important thing if we're going to see more people joining, I guess, making these lifestyle changes in pursuance of freedom. I think that's I think that's kind of a requirements. Now there's a website called anarchist.org, and there was one post on there that said, and I'm going to badly paraphrase it probably, but you're exactly correct that for a lot of people, they see no way out of the system. They see no way out of it whatsoever. So what freedom pioneers are doing now is they're learning the lifestyle. They're developing it. They're trying to make it easier and more simple for people for new people to adopt this lifestyle change. Now, back to the anarchist.org thing. The idea here is that freedom pioneer, or I guess the idea is to make it a seamless transition from the servile society to one of these free lifestyles. So, for example, the main task of freedom pioneers, and this was a really terrific point by the anonymous authors at anarchist.org. But that once an individual can pay like $29.99 a month for all of the essential services to withdraw from the servile society, once it's that easy to do, then I think we'll finally see some really drastic change happen quickly, because there are a lot of folks out there, man, that they do see problems with things the way they are. They've been presented with a very narrow list of solutions, mostly by the state and their government controlled and the government controlled media. So I think once I don't think it's going to be critical mass or anything like that, but I do think it will grow. It'll grow quite a bit once these lifestyle changes are easy and seamless to transition into. Because like I said, for there are folks that see problems, they just see no way out. So I think that's my main task with the Vonu podcast and with Liberty Under Attack, is to show people that these solutions exist, and to interview people who are actually doing these things, and to, I guess, just give my listeners all of the information necessary to start making decisions on what strategies they're going to pursue. So I agree 100% with what you were saying, and I think staying connected and really promoting the drastic freedom increases that these strategies bring forth, I think is a really great thing to do. But I guess just as kind of the counter position here, not really a counter position, but I'm sure, supplementary, complementary, whatever you want to call it. But obvious, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, an empty cup can't fill another. So right. I do think it's important for, especially probably at the beginning, when the transition is starting, when they sell their house, move out of their apartment, and they move into their van and start traveling around. I think there should be some time, like a transition time, where they where they have to get used to the lifestyle, and get used to it mentally, because after working for 40 hours for however many years the individual in question has done that, once they don't have to do that, they're gonna have a lot of time to themselves, right? So there are going to be some mental hurdles to this lifestyle that I think even as I said, the $29.99 essential services to withdraw from the servile society. I think the mental struggles are going to be there for anybody. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's being in uncomfortable positions is where people really grow, right? So I think there might be a transition time where maybe they are really introverted while they're trying to learn how to live this new life. But I think as soon as they get some things figured out, they need to share those with the world, so that people don't have to go through the same mistakes that they did.
Right. And because I think that the problem with a lot of really good workable anarchist thought is a lot of people who, I don't want to be too insulting, but a lot of people who get involved in anarchy because society is way too demanding of somebody who's that introverted, to be social, to be involved, to share with the other kids, to be a contributing member to essentially this capitalist class, and learn to be like, I guess a decent term would be learn to be a cog in that, learn to be like the tax cattle that the government needs them to be. And like, I think a lot of the reason people become anarchists, and that the reason that anarchy is largely a leftist ideology, I guess would be a good word for it, would be that a lot of,
at least,
yeah, well, is that a lot of these people just wanted out, and they didn't really like have a whole lot of, especially historically, before there were like video and audio recordings that were available to the common person. Like, a lot of these people wouldn't have even had the means to adequately convey it. It would have been all philosophy, like sort of Ralph Waldo Emerson, or what was his name, Thoreau.
Right.
So I like it, now that there is this easy access to a media platform. I think like having as many people start doing this, to where it's less, oh, that's interesting, and more, that actually might work. I think that that's very important, and I think that that's something that a lot of the more introverted people don't don't get or don't want to get, because essentially they're operating on the old school sort of like, you know, nobody's ever going to listen to me kind of thing. When essentially they could get out there, they could put their message out there and at least reach somebody so that the information could spread by zeitgeist.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I definitely agree. But just to speak to one other, I guess, one other type of individual who may not, produce self-liberational media. There was one person that reached out to me on the Vonu podcast page, and he's been a Venu nomad for like 25 or 30 years, and they have a sailboat that they live in part time. Like this guy is a true Vanuan, but he just didn't know of the term. So he splits time in his van and his sailboat, which is really, really badass. But he he's not I wouldn't say he's introverted, but he just practices very, very rigid security culture, and he has for a long time. So I mean, he communicated with me on Fascist Book, and told me about his lifestyle and all of that. But he didn't want to make the step to doing a YouTube video or doing a podcast, just because he stays under the radar. So that's another possibility too, is that they just practice really, really good security culture, and maybe they have kids with them. Maybe they have kids or someone traveling with them, and they're just they want to make sure that their family is as safe as possible. So that's another possibility too, because the state is a really evil institution, and they don't like homeless people. I'm sure you've seen a lot of the way homeless people have been treated by the state. Whether it's spikes on benches or whatever it is. When you're living in a van, you could get harassed a little extra just for the sake of you being homeless. So one of the recommendations, just for the benefit of your listeners, if you live in your van, I'm not going to recommend you lie to the police, but just say don't lie, just leave out some truth and say, I'm on a road trip. I'm traveling. Because that's not, just if you let them know you're homeless, even if it's by choice, they don't like that. They do not like that.
Right. And because like one of the movies that I like, and one of the movies that like I really recommend people look at to see sort of like the fictional version of the alternate perspective to this sort of like, oh, life in this culture and servile bullshit is normal, is Captain Fantastic. Have you seen that?
I have not, no.
Well, it's a really good movie about a guy who has I think, if I remember correctly, it was 5 kids, and he tries to reintegrate with society without losing his sense, and he has these kids on this rigid sort of like philosophical and wild and basically Vonu kind of mentality, and it's all designed to teach them how to live without society, and like the entire rest of society hates him for that. His kids have bruises because they were climbing rocks and fucking fell and bashed on a rock or something. They have like cuts and scrapes because life in the wild is wild.
It's not as comfortable, right? Yeah.
Right. And the rest of society doesn't really understand that, and they constantly attack him for it. And he's got some flaws. It's not like being a person in the wild makes you perfect and it makes you some sort of ideological saint, but he doesn't have as many flaws as people want to claim he does. And so the entire movie is a very interesting transition into him like finding out that society isn't all that bad, but his kids still like sticking around with him, and in the end anyway. And like it's a very good movie to sort of see the clash of those two worlds. I wouldn't necessarily call it like anything remotely approaching a documentary. It's fiction, and it's not necessarily that I want people to base their lives on something that didn't happen, but maybe more of that culture could start coming up if people started to take this sort of approach more often. And that would be interesting to me, because this entire war is a culture war. It's all in people's minds. So but you were talking about something in the Facebook chat. And you were talking about this thing, second realm. Mind talking a little bit about that in our final minutes here?
Sure, sure. Yeah, for purposes here, I mean, we're talking about difference in time here. We're talking about 1960s versus like the 2000s. So second realm, second realm in Vonu mini culture are synonymous terms, and first realm in the state of Serval society are synonymous terms here. A quick I'll provide a quick definition, and I'll just kind of flesh this out real briefly. So the first realm is a society that does not respect self-ownership or individual liberty, but rather heralds the supremacy of government and authority. In other words, it upholds the collective as superior to the individual. So the first realm is the state of servile society. You know what anarchists despise. You know, the state, the authoritarians who empower the state, and the culture that does not respect individualism and self-ownership. So that's the first realm, and the second realm is technically described as encrypted communication, encrypted currencies, anonymous and pseudonymous identities, and untraceable action. So the idea is the second realm are free autonomous zones where people can actually be free, where their autonomy is respected, where there's peace, and where people are actually truly free. Now, they can, I guess one other point on that, they can second realms can exist in both physical and digital, in the physical and digital realm. So like deep web IRC chats, deep web marketplaces, those would be examples of digital second realms. Now, physical second realms, some examples of that would be freedom festivals like the Midwest Peace Liberty Fest coming up next month, like Jackalope, the Jackalope Freedom Festival that happens in, I think, Arizona or New Mexico. I'm not 100% sure. Those would be examples of physical second realms. Van nomad intentional communities would be examples of second realms. They're free autonomous places where the state interference is not there, where people can actually live free. So that's the basic idea of the first and the second realm. Let me see if there's anything else interesting. We just wrapped up an entire series on it on Liberty Under Attack Radio, 16 episodes. It came out to like 40 hours, I think it was. So I'm not going to go too much in depth there because that entire series is there. But the idea is to build free autonomous zones in reality where people can actually be free. The Vonu lifestyle changes overlap with this very nicely. All of the work I do really coalesces. So when you talk about Vonu shelters, whether it's a polyethylene A tent in the Siskiyou National Forest, that would be an example of a second realm. If we're talking about a seastead out in the middle of the ocean, that would be a second realm. If we're talking about the intentional community that Derek Brose is going to start up in 2020 down in Texas, that would be an example of a second realm. I mean, there are a lot of examples of these out there now, but the reason I'm talking about it so much now is that I'd like to see a lot of people only really live free for a couple of weekends out of the year at freedom festivals or whatever. There are some folks out there who live free a lot more often if they're van nomads or minimal sailboaters or whatever. But the idea is to live free more often, more of the time. So to create a bunch of these second realms where people can actually live free is the idea.
So as for people who want like actual freedom as a paradigm rather than just something to get their energy out while once every once in a while.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And let me add this one other thing here. So I'm sure you've heard the quote. I think it was by Winston Churchill. Build a new society within the shell of the old. Well, with the second realm, what we're doing is we're building the new society not within the shell of the old, but outside of it, and despite its coercive existence. So we're basically, building our own free autonomous zones, regardless of what's happening in the second or happening in the first realm. We don't care what's going on there. We're going to live free in the here and now. In our second realms, and we're not going to try to change the system. We're not going to try to vote for the right people in. We're not going to use assassination politics to, murder their rulers. We're not going to do that. We're not going to try to influence or change the first realm at all. We're going to go live free in the here and now, with people who respect, person and autonomy. So that's the idea.
All right. And so on that level, the second realm would be for people who are basically itching to inch themselves.
Itching to inch themselves. Are you?
Inches. I'm never coming home. You have an inch bag where you have all the basic essentials, and you could just go out into the wilderness at any point with that bag. So basically, people who want to not be a part of the mainstream culture, those would be the people who would do a second realm society, proverbially speaking.
Well, the second realm, and I guess I should have mentioned this. It's not we're not talking about wilderness Vonu anymore. These are crypto anarchists. These are people
Right.
who who built a digital currency in 2013 because they realized that Bitcoin wasn't anonymous. These are folks who operate deep web IRC chats and marketplaces. Like these guys are crypto anarchists. There's a really good and this would best illustrate. I think there's a really good I guess crypto agorist novella called #Agora, and so these second realms, I mean, they were in Berlin, Germany. So like they were essentially, living free in a city using various strategies and tactics that they've developed. So as far as not interacting with the for the first realm or the servile society at all, not necessarily. I mean, it doesn't have to be a complete withdrawal. Some people may choose to you could have two different identities. You could have your identity in the first realm where you have your normal 9 to 5 job. You pay some taxes, and then at whenever you decide to, you can enter second realms, for the other 50% of the time, and you can live free. Whether that's attending a bunch of freedom festivals, whether that is working a 9 to 5 job for 6 months out of the year and living in a van the rest of it, whatever it ends up being. The idea is to live more of your life free than what you were before. So it doesn't require a complete withdrawal. I mean, it's definitely shades of gray. There's some folks who only attend one freedom festival a year, and that will be the only second realm experience they have. There'll be others who will have like 95% of their time living in second realms, and that's great too. So it's in no way, shape, or form a complete withdrawal from the first realm. But the important point is that the first realm and the second realm are clearly distinguished and delineated. And obviously, the first realm, if they don't like the existence of second realms of free places, as I said earlier, they'd like to see most of us tossed in a cage for just holding the ideas that we do. So these are two very distinct realms, and the second realm is basically where people can actually live free.
So the second realm is more like a parallel society. Like they won't
Yes, that's a good way
necessarily
to think about
touch.
it.
Okay, so it's people in the same area but on different tracks, essentially.
Sure, yeah, because you could have a second realm, located in the area of a first realm, but it's just distinguished in that second realm. People can live free. There's respect for personal autonomy, even though it may be embedded within an alien society. Yeah.
All right. So, all right. So, generally speaking, because we do have to wrap this up,
Sure.
what would your message be to people to try and get them to disconnect from society the way society wants things to be?
Right. And this is the two piece, I guess the one piece of advice I give in pretty much every single podcast or interview I do. And it's even if you don't know what you want to do, or even if any of the things I presented today aren't appealing to you, there's one thing I would recommend everyone start doing now if you haven't already. And that's make your job location independent. That's a big one. That alone will, even for people, in the state servile society, being your own boss and being on your own schedule, that's extremely freeing rather than being, run through the corporate machine. So, make your job location independent and or pursue financial independence where a job becomes optional. So those would be the two things I would definitely advise, because even if you aren't sure, I mean, it took me 3 years before I decided I was going to be a van nomad after learning about the freedom strategy. So even if you're completely unsure, maybe it's not the right time in your life yet. Maybe you've got to pay off some debt. Maybe you have to, I don't know, get your kid through high school. I don't know, whatever the situation may be. We're all individuals. The idea is to start taking a concrete step now that doesn't require a major lifestyle change at all. Just making your job location independent, or intensively saving and living frugally, so that you can retire early, age 40 instead of age 65 like it is in the servile society, or 62 or whatever it is. So that would be the main piece of advice. And the second would be, I want to reemphasize that, you know, this life is short, and we only have one of them to live, you know, barring any religious discussions, or religious debates. We only have one life to live, and I know for me personally, I want to live free. I want to live free, and I every single day I spend in the Servile Society, it's a day. It just motivates me more to, you know, get on the road and pursue van nomadism, so I can actually be free. So that's kind of, I would just, you know, really implore your listeners to, you know, really sit down and think about what it is that they want out of life. And if freedom is one of those things, then I would advise that, you know, a really, you know, deep thought and look into the various strategies available would definitely be a wise idea. So there's the Building the Second Realm series over at Liberty Under Attack. You can get you know, a lot more information than what I just you know, laid out there. You can also check out the Vonu podcast, where, I mean, all we talk about is Vonu and freedom strategies. The first season was philosophy, because the philosophy behind Vonu is pretty unique, but we're only talking about action and solutions. So if you want to be free in the here and now, then you know, those are two great sources of self-liberational media. So
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. It was very informative. And so you would recommend that people just find you at the Vonu podcast website?
Yep, VonuPodcast.com. And if any of your listeners have any questions or anything like that, Shane at VonuPodcast.com is the email.
Cool. All right. Well, this has been the latest episode of State Smash Podcast. Make sure to subscribe and like if you liked this presentation, and make sure to spread this sort of video around, because realistically, that's the way that this sort of thing is going to get off the ground. We got to start talking to each other. Communication is the first fruits of change, and being able to tell your family maybe to move out and be their own person, being able to actively convey this message to people, that has the potential to change the world. So thank you for coming on, Shane. There's going to be a post show afterward, and this has been State Smash Podcast signing out.